We're with Neil Bolton. He is our presenter today for the Process Improvement Masterclass Series. Thanks for joining us today, Neil.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure.
Now, to talk a little bit about Session 3, Neil, applying process improvement to waste collections. What does this mean, process improvement?
Tasks that we do are just part of a larger process. And when we talk about process improvement, what we're talking about really is how to evaluate each small piece of the process and make them more efficient. And so we can get into some details later, but essentially we're going to get a feel for how their job can be most efficiently done. They're going to get a new perspective in terms of how they utilize equipment or labor or any process, any materials. The main takeaway is just a new perspective on how to look at their processes.
What are some of the inefficiencies that are common in waste collection operations?
Well, some of the inefficiencies we see there are poor route layout, where the routes are not set up efficiently. Maybe some routes are too easy, some are too heavy. Sometimes we see that facilities simply don't have a good handle on what they're actually collecting. We see lots of inefficiencies on how routes are organized. For example, some routes may have a lot of lifts or a lot of cans that are dumped into a truck and very little tonnage, and others may have a lot of tonnage and fewer cans. We find that the time and the cost associated with collecting trash is really related to how long it takes to drive the route and how many lifts we have to make. So from that standpoint, even balancing out the size of the cans so that we have fewer lifts, maybe with larger cans, or not so many cans so that we have generally full cans to dump rather than a driver having to dump empty cans. So balancing out the number of lifts with the tonnage that's generated from those lifts is a good benchmark. It's a good system or a good measure of how efficient a collection operation is.
Mm-hmm. And again, Neil, once you've identified this inefficiency and you've come up with a solution, how long would it take to implement that solution when it comes to waste collection?
When it comes to waste collections, implementing a solution can take literally days. If it's something simple in terms of adjusting a route or rebalancing routes so that all drivers have an equal amount of work, that can take very little time. That can happen in a matter of days or weeks. Some of those changes, some of those process improvement implementations can take months, sometimes more than a year, depending on what's involved. If we have to change equipment, different types of trucks, different kinds of processes, that can take a while to implement. If we have to change out the types of cans or the size of cans, that too can take a while because there's a lead time to be able to order new containers, new bins, new cans, and get those distributed. So depending on what part of the process we're trying to change, that timing, the scheduling, can take from days to over a year.
Okay. And you are going to be talking about the theory of constraints in this session. Can you give us an example of how that theory applies to waste collections?
Yes. The theory of constraints effectively says that if you look at every process in an activity, whether you're in an assembly line at a plant, or you're running a landfill, or you're in collections where you're picking up trash off the curb, the theory of constraints says that if you look at each step in the process, there will be one step that will be a bottleneck, that will be a constraint. So for example, collections, we may find that the routes are efficient, but when those vehicles show up at a transfer station, especially during the peak time, perhaps late in the morning when everybody else shows up at the transfer station, that there's a lot of waiting time. So we may have a route truck that runs a route efficiently, gets to the transfer station, and then has to wait in line for 30 or 40 minutes to be able to dump. That is a constraint. That waiting is a constraint. So sometimes we find that rescheduling routes or reorganizing them so that trucks show up at different times at the transfer station or to the landfill can help eliminate that particular constraint. The way to identify where a constraint is to look at each step in the process and identify the production rate of that particular step, and then find out where the lowest production rates are. Those will be your bottlenecks. Those are the constraints.
Now, what inefficiencies are pretty common in transfer operations? Say, for how long would it take to implement a solution to that inefficiency as well?
Well, in waste collections, some of the most common inefficiencies are related to routing. We find a lot of variability out there, something that you'll hear over and over through these sessions. variation in any system, in any process, typically indicates a problem. It indicates an inefficiency. For example, if we have a route where one driver can run the entire route in 6 hours, but we have another driver who can run that same route in 5 hours, well, there's variation. Or if we have one driver that runs a route in 6 hours one day and 8 hours next week, and the following week runs that same route in 4.5 hours, that kind of variation typically indicates a problem. What we want to see is consistency. So in terms of collections operations, it's always important to have good data. We want to know how many tons per load does a truck bring into a landfill or a transfer station on average? Or how long does it take to run a route on average? Are certain days of the week longer than others? What are the variables in that? And it's that variation that indicates where there may be some problems.
I see. And for a solution to be put into place and up and running, how long would that take, Neil?
Well, it depends on the process. If it's a matter of rerouting routes so that they're balanced and we can get less variation, that's something that can happen over a period of weeks. Sometimes inefficiencies are related to the type of equipment that we have. For example, we may have the wrong type of route trucks, the wrong type of system, and so changing those things out actually could take a period of years, because sometimes the budget just won't allow us to re-outfit or update a fleet immediately. It may have to be done over a period of years and phased in. We find, though, that most process improvements related to collections can be done within a year or so.
Thank you for listening.